Hey friends, how are you? It's Mr. McKinney here with Mr. McKinney's Historic Houston. Welcome to another edition of Live from the Heritage Society with Mr. McKinney. Our featured guest today is Allison Bell, as our Executive Director, talking about the Heritage Society, but also Kimber Fountain, the one y'all been waiting for, Kimber Fountain. So hopefully you can hear me okay. Let's talk about the Scanlon Fountain real quick while we wait. This is the beautiful Scanlon Fountain. A lot of history behind Mayor Thomas Scanlon. I'll talk about his legacy in a second, but I just want to show you the fountain itself. Check it out, because this actually set in front of his house. It was built in 1891 out there well, it was way out in the south end, actually, is where it used to be. I'm going to take this off so you can hear me a little better. But the Scanlon Fountain is important. In fact, more importantly is Mayor Thomas Scanlon's legacy. Let me talk about him for a little bit while we get close to the church and go and meet with Allison Bell, our Executive Director. Mayor Thomas Scanlon, he was born in Ireland. He comes here to Houston. He actually is very active in a variety of things political. He becomes the alderman for the 3rd Ward. Actually, I'll probably do this. I want you to see it again. Look at that fountain, because it's set at his home at 1917 Houston, right in Houston, Texas, downtown, 1917 Main Street and the Pierce Elevated is where it's at now. So it's actually the northeast corner of Main and Prairie, and Pierce rather. So there it is. Beautiful fountain. It's actually a bird bath. It is not an actual fountain, but it becomes that later on. It was donated to the Heritage Society, one of the many things that are given to Heritage Society because of the legacy of this awesome space, right? So there it is. Thomas Scanlon had 7 daughters total, okay? Most famous out of those 7 daughters is his daughter, Kate Scanlon. She would go on in 1926 to do that beautiful theater you probably heard of. It's called the Ritz Theater in downtown Houston. And then she would also go on in 1909 to open up a building known as the Scanlon Building. Now, that was on the property that Mr. Scanlon bought, and that property is really significant. That property is really at the corner of Preston and Main Street, okay? Think about that corner, right? We're talking about the corner of Preston and Main. We're talking about the 1909 Scanlon Building, which is our very first skyscraper to be over 10 stories tall, okay? Kate Scanlon breaks with Jesse H. Jones's tradition of having buildings taller than 10 stories and becomes an 11-story building. It was also the first building in downtown to be with a steel frame structure, so it becomes a fireproof, if you will. That property might sound familiar, the corner over there of Main and Preston, because that, of course, is where a guy named Sam Houston had the White House of Texas. Now, most people know that Texas was a separate country from 1836 until 1845. 9 years, we had our own president, our own vice president, and basically we're a separate country, as we all know. And we had to have a White House where the president would live. We also know, of course, the Capitol is where the Rice Hotel is. The Capitol was originally going to be planned for Congress Square, which is actually where Market Square is located. It used to be called Congress Square originally. Pretty cool. Now, Thomas Scanlon's beautiful mansion at 1917 Main Street was actually built by a very important architect here in Houston. You might know the name Eugene Heiner. Eugene Heiner actually, one of his most grand homes was Mayor Thomas Scanlon's house, right there at 1917 Main Street. Now, you might know the name Eugene Heiner also because of his 1885 Cotton Exchange building right there on Travis and Franklin. Building is still there, lovingly restored and safe, thank goodness. But that home itself has significance. And it was actually kind of across the street was actually John Kirby Allen's house. That's right. On Travis, John Henry Kirby Allen's house is right there in the 200 block. And a bonus question for y'all. How about this? We'll ask you this question later on. Answer it for us. John Kirby Allen, his house was on Travis in between Franklin and Congress. But what about his brother, Augustus Chapman Allen? Where was Augustus Chapman Allen's house? He had 2 houses here in Houston along with Charlotte Allen. One of the houses was the house that we're not going to tell you about. The other one you have to guess, but let me give you a clue. Think real hard to Alfred Finn and think real hard to this 1929 iconic downtown building. Hopefully you're commenting right now. And by the way, help us out by doing some likes as you're watching the video. Go ahead and like the video. Those hearts and those likes that pop up are a big deal to us, as many of you probably important. And in case you're tuning in right now, I'm Mr. McKinney with Mr. McKinney's Historic Houston for the Heritage Society. I have the pleasure of serving on their board, and where we're at now is Sam Houston. And I want to go ahead and introduce you to Allison Bell, who's our Executive Director. Say hello, Allison Bell.
Hello, everyone.
Continue the series that we have. We go inside these historical homes. One of the homes that we're in buildings and structures. Attention, by the way, look at where we're framed at. Look up at this beautiful downtown temple on top, and it's shadowed by this amazing church. So Allison, let's talk about this church because people want to know.
Sure. This church was built in 1891 by German and Swiss immigrants. It was located up off of Mangum and 290. It was called White Oak Settlement. Parishioners donated this church to the Heritage Society in 1968. So what I love about it is that they oriented it exactly the way it was, facing east, which is facing Jerusalem.
The church itself is an icon in Houston's mini skyline. People look at it all the time, and we're going to go inside, of course, shortly, and we're going to talk more about, throughout this video, some of the great features the church has itself, which also...
A shout out to the Parks Department. They just recently painted our church, so it is spot on, beautiful white, again, with no green algae on the top. So we are taking care of these buildings. You know,
it's important too, by the way. This is your park, Houston. It is your oldest municipal park. Yes. Our wonderful, collections curator Ginger Burney did a really great talk. 120 years. People don't realize that. And yes, some of y'all might be chiming in that Emancipation Park is 1871, but that wasn't a City of Houston park until 1916. Okay, so that means that it wasn't a city park. This is the first City of Houston park. Part of that whole, as Barry Moore says, that City Beautiful movement that was sweeping the country in that time period. Right. People wanted to make their cities more beautiful, more attractive, more of an amenity, and they did it with Sam Houston Park. So let's go inside. Let's do it.
Let's go inside.
Here we go inside the 1891 St. John's Church. Here we are. Check it out, Houston. This is exciting.
Yes, so as Mr. McKinney said, the beautiful Gothic windows. And the wonderful thing about the acoustics in here are that the ceilings are curved. They call them cove, but they're curved. And so you don't need a microphone. You don't need anything. You just bring your violin or your guitar or whatever. And it's beautiful.
Well, this is great. We're going to go ahead and have a seat so that we can, actually, let me do this real quick. Let me get this computer on.
And then I want to point out while you're getting set up.
Yeah, check it out over there. That's great.
Message on the top that reads in English, "Blessed are they that hear the word of God and keep it." And there's another message that I'll show you on the way out.
All right. Well, here we go. We are good to go. Come on in. Thank you all again for joining us. Let me just set up our little sound system over here because we are excited for the last show that we had. And by the way, I want a little shout out to, of course, Michael Bloodworth. That those of you who watched the show last week, you know that Michael Bloodworth did an amazing job. He is always a wealth of knowledge, and he's just the kindest person out there, able to spread really Houston history. So it was so wonderful to have him on the show last week.
It was fascinating.
Absolutely, 100%. Well, like I said, if you're just tuning in now, this is Allison Aries Bell with the Heritage Society. She's the executive director for here. She and her staff manage 10 historic buildings throughout the year now since 1954, 66 years of kind of doing this. Which
I haven't been here that long.
Yeah, really. But you are a native Houstonian. You've been in Houston for numerous years, and love your city. And you could be anywhere, but you choose to be here in Houston. So we appreciate you doing that. Well, real quick, let's go over. Last week we had the pleasure of a couple of audience members winning items. Let's kind of go over. Let's go over what those are.
Sure. So our first item was the Leah White CD that Mr. McKinney mentioned. We sell this in our gift shop, of course, and the person, well, let me give you the question that was asked. The question that was asked was, when did the Houston Municipal Airport open? And the answer, in case you all were watching or want to know, was 1928, the year my dad was born. The woman who won that is Sharon Schmidt Sampson.
Yay.
So congratulations, Sharon. We'll be in touch, and I'll hand deliver it to you if you want me to. I won't touch. No touching.
Hey, Houston, how are you? It's Mr. McKinney.
Then the second item, the question was, what company did Michael Bloodworth work for? And that was guessed properly. The answer is Goodyear, the Goodyear blimp. I believe he brought a shirt and all kinds of items from the Goodyear blimp company. And the woman who won that was Diane Boehm, B-O-E-H-M. I'm sorry if I'm not saying that properly. And then, of course, the final item, this wonderful book written by Andrea White about the the Baker Playhouse, Secretary Baker's last childhood home with all of his ancestors. The question was, what was Houston's first hometown airline? And the answer is Trans-Texas Airways. And so also Sharon Schmidt Sampson won that as well. So congratulations to all the winners, and stay tuned for tonight's questions with more door prizes.
Yeah, we've got some great questions. I just love the idea of those folks chiming in because they were paying attention, they were watching it. So thank you so much for doing that. And if you just, like I said, tuned in, we're getting ready to have Kimber Fountain on the show, but I wanted to introduce you to the Executive Director for the Heritage Society, Allison Bell, who worked so hard to make this place happen. I think we also
Mr.
have...
McKinney, I have to say thank you for all the hard work you do, because you were doing this as a volunteer, and I've watched how much blood, sweat, and tears you're putting in. You're buying equipment. You're coming up here every day to get us ready, and we're so glad you're on our board. Yes, lots of sweat, but thank you, because you're doing this out of the kindness in your spare time. So thank you.
Well, that's very kind of you, and I obviously enjoy doing it, but more importantly, I enjoy promoting Houston history, and that's what I've been doing since 2002 professionally, and we appreciate y'all allowing us to do this here and really showcase how great the Heritage Society is. Y'all, if you've grown up in Houston, you know this space, you drive by it every day. If you're new to Houston, you should get to know the space. The idea is we need to get more people to realize the value in saving our history here in Houston. We've absolutely, even in current times right now with the pandemic, you look and see how history repeats itself. So we need to learn from history and absorb knowledge from it, because we will be a better society if we know where we came from. And we don't have as strong of a preservation culture as other cities do, so that's a call to action to get more young people and more people in general behind preserving some of these wonderful sites. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. I also know that it's important that we I have viewer questions, because we said if you have questions, you're welcome. So you told me that you had some questions that you got sent in to you and things that were posted. So you can ask questions during this lecture. You're also more than welcome to be able to email us.
Yeah, you can do it right now. You can send us questions right now. We'll be watching. We've got a great production staff that you can't see right now, so
behind the scenes,
checking on us, and they've been great to work with, so thank you to them too.
So I'm curious, because I haven't seen these questions, and I want to know what people had to say. This is good.
This is a funny one. What was the green juice that Mr. McKinney was drinking on his show? Tell him about your green juice.
Okay, so I get this a lot. My friend owns a juice bar. It's called Nourish. Over there, there's two locations. One is on in the Heights on Durham and I-10, and then one is over on West Gray. And she owns it, and she named a drink after me. It's called the Mister McKinney. And full disclosure, I get no money from this drink. There's celery, kale,
but
spinach.
He's drinking them every day.
I drink them every day. I drink them all the time. People have said, "How come I've lost weight?" Well, this is the reason why. So we always have these around, and we have them on our radio show as well. So go to Nourish and ask for the Mister McKinney. Mister McKinney. And she's very kind. And I also have a cocktail. One of my students owns a bar at 110 Main, an historic 1876 Raphael building. 100 block of Main is obviously historic. It's right there, right? Commerce and Main. It's called Lily and Bloom, and he named a cocktail drink after me. It's called the Mister McKinney. It's Hendrick's Gin. And what's interesting is I want Chris Bell to do a Cocktails with Chris YouTube, because he's exploding. If you don't know this, Chris Bell is the husband of our wonderful Executive Director, Allison Bell. He's extremely witty, but he's also very talented as a politician, somebody who cares about the city he's supported over the years and represented. But he's got a great YouTube show, Cocktails with Chris. You got to check it out. He talks about,
very busy.
And I only bring this up because it has a history connection. He talks about the history of the drinks and how they were made, and then of course he also has dapper outfits that are regular clothes, not outfits, because it's what he normally wears. But he's always in a different outfit matching kind of theme. So anyway, I like to mention that.
History.
More questions. What do we have?
So
this is exciting.
One came in. This one is more like a sort of a constructive criticism, which I appreciated.
That makes me nervous.
No, it was. She said that she loves watching the live shows, but Mr. McKinney needs to speak a little slower. I know you get so excited and you talk so fast. But she loves the content, and that was the only thing. It's just the speaking a little slower.
And I'm sorry that happens.
Because you're spinning.
I'm going 1,000 miles a minute, and typically, the great thing about our tours that we give on the history buses, we're always like, we're driving to a different location, right? So we're there, we're talking about it, so it's a little more timed. But when it's a live feature like this, I'm horrible at cocktail parties. I just, people come to me. So, but I'm sorry, but that's good to know. And whoever sent that, I will work hard at talking slower, because it's important I enunciate. It's important that people can hear us, and I appreciate that. I assume it's positive.
It's
she's saying she likes
loves
it.
The content. So
okay, that's good. What else we got?
This is a funny one. Somebody said, "What's with that little yellow bus on the table?"
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Well, so those of y'all who may not know about the Houston History Bus, it's a creation of mine. It is literally a mobile classroom, a Houston history mobile classroom. It's what I use to teach my school kids about Houston history. I've had the pleasure since 2002 of going into LaPorte ISD, Spring Branch ISD, and HISD, and teaching those kids about their local history. And we do it on board the Houston History Bus. It's a nonprofit model, so it's free to the public, and people can go onto our site and check out MrMcKinney.com and learn about the free tours. And that's the whole reason. We, just like the Heritage Society, we're all about education. We really want people to be educated about their city. That means the world to us. If they can leave, with a little more knowledge, and then I also say a little more civic pride. If you know about your city, you're more likely to get involved, whether it's like your husband through elected scenarios and politicians, or whether it's just through cleaning up your communities, volunteering, things like that.
And catching the kids while they're young to get them interested in history.
We want that because we want future preservationists. We want young people.
We've got to have
and our program here at the Heritage is really cool as well. I get a real thrill. I know you do too when the school kids are here.
Oh, gosh,
and those days will come. They'll come back like everything else will come back.
Right.
But it's neat to be able to impact a young person with knowledge about Houston history. So what else do we have?
And then the last one, okay, so last week someone was asking why you were so perspiring so much in that hot Nichols Rice Cherry House. They could tell.
I'm perspiring right now too, but for different reasons because it's like
I know.
So that's you know what, and you can relate to this too, just kind of working here, and nothing's perfect in nonprofit.
Right.
It is not perfect. And I will be very honest with you. First off, bless Michael Bloodworth for dealing with us last week, because the AC went out in the Nichols Rice Cherry House that day. And that is a big issue. And I think it's important to talk about this because, first off, most folks out there can probably relate, whether you've lived in a home that you've owned or rented it. As a homeowner, you've got to deal with your AC breaking down, your pipes messing up, you got to paint your house every couple of years, all these things that go with managing a house. Mm-hmm. Well, y'all have got those same problems, but
times 10.
Y'all have got them times 10. So the AC did go out, and I'm typically high energy, so I'm going to kind of sweat a little bit. But the AC went out literally like that afternoon, and it was one of those 103 days in Houston that we had, so it was one of the hottest days.
And that house faces the west.
It does face west with beautiful, tall, 12-foot windows. Mm-hmm. So it was hot that day, and like I said, thank you to Michael Bloodworth for putting up with it, and we made the AC, make sure the AC worked over here. It typically always works well in here. I think maybe it's because it's just blessed.
Very good.
Or maybe just because it's used for rentals, so it makes sense, which we'll talk about later on.
We'll talk about that.
Well, I'm trying to think of what else do we have to talk about.
I was going to talk about this is a wonderful rental facility. Yeah. And I know you have a guest coming soon, so I'll be brief. But we rent this church out quite often for weddings. It's one of our favorite events that we have. This church holds 65 people, and as I mentioned earlier, beautiful curved ceilings, so the acoustics are wonderful. Right now, of course, for COVID, I believe we are at 50%, but who knows what will be. And then also there are, let's see, we have, and I have a wedding that's booked in September, and I've already rescheduled several. So it's just so iconic with the background, and then you take pictures in the park.
Well, let's take a tour. Give me some more pointers and things that are happening real quick. Let's do that. I think that'd be worth our time. In fact, tell us where. What's that? What it says up there?
Oh yes, well I mentioned that earlier. It says, "Bless your going." Well, no, this one says, "Find the Word of God and keep it." So we already talked about that one, but I was going to show you this one on the way out. And of course, we've got all these beautiful pews. These were built by church parishioners and donated to the Heritage Society. This stove was originally used for heat, of course. We've got the certificates on the wall showing when this church was built, and then these wonderful little lanterns. This church is beautifully decorated during the holidays as well. And you get about 6 or 7 people in this. And then what I wanted to show you on the way out is this says, "Bless you and keep the word of God." And amen. And then our favorite thing.
Oh, yeah. So, okay, I want to check this out. So, okay, you got to listen to this. This is awesome. Here we go.
Yes, the bell. So I have all kinds of people wanting to ring that. So, look, here's our bell.
Oh my gosh. Hey, it's Kimber Fountain. Oh my gosh. It is Houston and Galveston author Kimber Fountain. Here she is. She's here to join us for the live show. Thank you for being here. Thanks for joining us. And thank you, Allison Bell, by the way, for the great tour that you gave earlier. Well, first off, if you are here in the live segment, you can see how awesome Allison Bell described this place. It is available for rental. You have to reach out to her. She does handle all the rentals. So definitely reach out to Allison Bell. Well, Kimber, come join us because I know people tuned in just to hear you speak. So go ahead and sit down over here, and then we will get started. I'll let you get us set up real quick. We'll get started with all that. Okay, Kimber Fountain joining us.
Hi, everybody.
Well, let's see. Is everybody on? Okay, we're good. We're here. Here, let me give you Mister McKinney.
Oh, I love this.
You were on the radio show that we had, so we'll just kind of shake this up. And like I said, full disclosure, I don't get anything from these drinks. I don't need it. They're healthy enough. They feed me up. So cheers. Cheers. There we go. Okay, that sounds good. That's great. It is great. Nourishing. Well, let's dive right in. Kimber Fountain, you kind of started out writing for the Galveston magazines, and golly, people just were so enthusiastic about your writing that they probably were hounding you to go out there and to do a variety of books, but it was probably that one book that got you started. And by the way, we had a chance to meet and hang out over in Galveston. I think one of the great things about working with other historians like yourself is that you care about history as much as I do. You're absolutely passionate, but you've done a great gift, an awesome mitzvah. You put them into this book format that people can now have a copy of. So I want you to talk about your books real quick. The first one we'll talk about is the Galveston Seawall Chronicles. Kind of take us, and what we're going to do, we decided this really kind of as I started putting this show together and doing the script for, we're like, wait a minute, there is way too much information. Way too much information with Kimber Fountain to cover in 1 hour quick segment. So we knew that we needed to do it in a variety. So we're going to have Kimber come back and talk about her books in depth and individual and or the history, because you're a pretty coveted speaker. You speak at a lot of events, on a monthly basis, talking about these different varieties of Galveston history. And you can tell, look at the different Galveston Seawall Chronicles. She talks about the Red Light District, and she talks about the Maceos, her newest book. What that means is that she's really invested in Galveston history, and there's no one other, I think, that's passionate about it than Kimber Fountain is. So we'll just kind of talk about the history of these areas in a small format to cover our quick 45 1-hour segment that we have with you, but I do want you to come back. So I want to tell the audience that we're going to have her come back. So here we go. Talk about the Seawall Chronicles.
Well, the building of the Galveston Seawall and the subsequent grade raising is still considered one of the most monumental feats of civil engineering that's ever been accomplished in the history of the United States, not just Texas or the Gulf Coast. And so originally the seawall, it's kind of weird. Right now it's a straight line, right? But originally, if you're familiar with where Broadway meets the seawall in Galveston, or there's a McDonald's there, it's where the seawall curves, the seawall used to be an L shape, actually. And the eastern arm of the seawall actually went down right here, right down 6th Street, right there. But then later on, they decided to extend it, so it went this way, and then they actually filled in this whole area over here east of 6th Street. So, but then the grade raising elevated the entire southern half of the island an estimated 13 feet. So it's just an absolutely amazing story. It's the very first story, a history story that I learned when I moved to Galveston originally many years ago, and I was obsessed with it from the beginning. And that's a good, better picture of that.
Yeah, and what's neat is we all have a seawall story, right? We've all gone to Galveston.
Yeah.
We've walked the seawall.
Sure.
We've absorbed the beautiful, beautiful. I call it sometimes municipal too. Like you're getting refreshed when you go to Galveston.
Sure.
At least I do. I mean, I'm a Gulf Coast boy.
Oh, yeah.
I know people complain about the water, being.
It's just silt. It's just silt.
We are to the west of the Mississippi, so the way it's going to happen, it's going to come down to us. It is what it is. But I think it really is refreshing to walk up and down the seawall. But people, and then the functions that happen on the seawall, whether they're these awesome bathing beauty contests.
Well, that's the beauty of this book, is that the seawall, unlike our stoic buildings on the Strand that are have been there 150 years, the seawall was constantly evolving and changing to keep up with whatever decade it was. You know how each decade had its trends and its certain stylistic qualities and aesthetics. And so it was amazing. And I didn't even realize that before I started writing this. But when I started, diving into this history, I just realized that, on the seawall, we were constantly tearing down and rebuilding and tearing down and rebuilding. This is an example in the 1910s. This was Electric Park that was on the seawall here. And you can see all the people. Basically, at that time, the Seawall Boulevard was actually more like Atlantic City, kind of a boardwalk, you know, horse and buggies, you know, no room for cars or anything, no cars at the time. But this was a big, you know, it was a big amusement park. And but you can also see, you know, how it's reminiscent of the fun, you know, that's still had on the seawall today, just a different decades version of that kind of fun. So, yeah,
and
what
then
else we got?
there's also iconic structures on the
Sure.
seawall that all of us know and
Oh, yeah.
recognize. Talk about this beautiful, you know, 1911 gem.
I would love to. The Hotel Galvez, constructed in 1911, was actually built as a celebration of the completion of the original portion of the seawall, as well as the grade raising.
And for context,
Sure.
we got the seawall, but like, so construction starts in 1902.
1902. It only actually took 21 months
Wow.
to finish the first original arm of the seawall. Of course, they
Wow.
extended it many more times to where it's 10.2 miles as it is today, and then elevated, you know, the grade as well. And so the grade raising actually took 7 years.
Yeah.
And we'll get to some pictures of that in a minute. But the Galvez is an iconic. This is skipping a couple of decades ahead into like about the 1950s. And
But
this,
you had these little motels all throughout the
yeah,
seawall.
the Jack
because-
Tar is famous.
But
Lots of people know
that was
the Jack
something
Tar.
that was an escape for folks. You know, we don't have mountains and things. We have the beach
Yeah.
in our area, in our region, so people recognize that. Now this event that happens, talk about this massive. We're coming up on the anniversary in September.
Sure.
What happens in 1900 that changes the course of the seawall, or is the reason why we have it?
Sure. September 8th of 1900, what would be considered a Category 4 hurricane by today's standards struck the island. And okay, so imagine the beach. And now it's no surprise that water is the most powerful force on the face of the planet, right? Look at the Grand Canyon, right? Water did that. And so think about, before the seawall was there, the Gulf waters at the behest of 140-mile-an-hour winds, just picking up the Gulf waters and just shoving them onto the island. And so all of this water came in and it just scraped everything off of its foundation from the beach side and created this 8-mile-long, 20-foot-high wall of debris that made like an arc around the downtown area. Strangely, here, this is a
Most of the
picture of that
structures
debris
are
wall.
of what material?
Now, most of
They're
those houses
wood.
were wood. And so think about everything that's in this wall. Horse and buggies, baby furniture, you have kitchen stoves, and of course you have bodies, right? And so this was almost an insurmountable tragedy that struck Galveston. And it's not surprising that the highest point of the storm surge that day was 15.7 feet, and the seawall was built to be exactly 7 feet, or just over 1 foot higher than that storm surge, and that was not random at all.
You know, and then also too, the seawall proves itself in 1915. People
It
don't
did.
realize the 1915 hurricane. So, for example, I'm the president for the Bel Air Historical Society, and we talk about this, the idea of this, hurricane similar but not as strong that ends up sweeping through the prairie, really, in Bel Air, and knocks out 2/3 of the homes that are in this brand new 1908 prairie town that's created in 1915, 7 years later. So the seawall proves itself to be valuable in 1915 when it protects the city from the
Sure
hurricane.
did. And still 100 years
Oh, yeah.
later, it's still protecting us. And
Oh,
if you would
Ike
like to know, if you'd like to know what Hurricane Ike would have done to Galveston without the seawall, all you have to do is look a few miles to the east at Bolivar Peninsula.
Wow.
I was actually still living in Chicago at that time, and I remember them doing, the aerial footage. And we used to vacation in Bolivar when I was a kid. And I literally got up and went to the TV screen because there was just nothing left. If you remember Bolivar Peninsula after Ike, there was maybe one house out of every 100, that was still standing. And that's exactly what happened to Galveston. And so the seawall, it has endured the test of time, and it's just amazing.
And this is construction of the seawall.
It
These
is.
photos are mixed back and forth, but you can kind of tell the
Yeah.
curvature, obviously, in the seawall.
Those wooden frames. That
So
they
now,
put,
people don't realize, in addition to creating the seawall that helped to save and kind of protect Galveston, what is something that people don't realize happened in Galveston around the same time period?
You're talking about the grade raising?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, oh my gosh. So speaking of hurricanes, everybody remembers what happened to New Orleans during Katrina, right? When the levees busted. And that's because the levee was nothing but a concrete wall. And so it basically enclosed that area of town into like a bowl. And that's exactly what the seawall would have done if it had just been the seawall. And so what our brilliant Board of Engineers, who were tasked with protecting Galveston in the future, what they realized was that it wasn't enough just to build that seawall. We also had to elevate the elevation of the island to meet the seawall at first, and then it slopes down gradually as you go to downtown. So this is a great example of everyone having to jack up their houses on stilts. And then we dredged in water from the harbor. This was a canal that was actually dredged behind the seawall after it was built, and then it went all the way around to the harbor. And so these are called self-loading hopper dredges, and they would suck up silt from the harbor. They would careen down that canal, and then they would attach to these big pipes. And then, as you can see, the water being rushed out. And there were grade raising districts, and so they would build a little levee around each district, and then they would pipe this in. Now, this was only 10% silt and 90% water, and so they would pipe it in. They would let the water drain off, then they would pipe another load in and let the water drain off, and time after time after time until they raised, the level of the ground up even. This is a picture of workers that, these boardwalks, go back, Ron. Mm-hmm. These boardwalks are really important. This is how people got across that part of the island for 7 years. There were boardwalks that attached houses throughout the neighborhoods. Some walkways would actually take you through a parlor of somebody's house, if you were trying to get to work. And this is an example. This is the levee right here as well, one of the levees in one of the grade raising districts. And then here's the silt water before it's drained. So just an absolutely amazing, stunning feat that was accomplished in Galveston. And this is a better aerial view of the canal. Now this is about where Avenue Q would be right now. So I think, so this is the seawall over here. And then you can see Galveston proper in the back. So this canal was dug. Remember, I told you the seawall was an L. So the canal was dug directly 100 feet behind that seawall. And funny enough, they used the land that they excavated the canal. They put that behind the seawall to create Seawall Boulevard. And then later on, used the dredges again to fill back in the canal. So just absolutely monumental.
And this is the final product.
Yeah, that's a later version of the Hotel Galvez and the seawall. And you see the granite riprap they also did. It's still there today.
And I think later on they put the jetties out there to really
Yeah, they'd actually started doing the jetty system even earlier than that. And that was actually as in an attempt to try to deepen the harbor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because our goal was to be the depth of a first-class port, because the deeper your port, the bigger ships you can bring in. And so we never quite made it, but
and of course Houston had in 1914 we get to open our deep water port, and really which is interesting too. I think, in 1914 we opened our deep water port where it currently is now, but also at the same time in 1914 another important maritime milestone happens. The Panama Canal opens. So think about that. Houston is uniquely positioned to benefit from the opening of their brand new port and the Panama Canal, brand new deep water port, because we have the 1907 turning basin and we have
and also uniquely positioned to take business away from Galveston.
That's right.
But that's okay. We're not bitter. We're not bitter.
And speaking of business, we got to talk about these lovely ladies.
Yes.
Let's talk about Galveston's Red Light District.
Hey.
Because this is a interesting book. It gets a lot of attention, but the way that you tell this story is from a different perspective. You're giving more of a human story to some of the folks that made this district possible, and then the reason why they went into this type of business.
The reason why.
So the reason why, absolutely. So let's just kind of dive into Vice and the Red Light District with Kimber Fountain.
Yeah, the Red Light District, I had severe anxiety for the 2 months before this book came out, because I just wasn't. I knew that that some people could look at the subject matter and think, oh my gosh, what is this girl doing? What is this woman doing? And so, but once it came out, it was so well received. But I think it was because I dealt with a very delicate issue with a very thoughtful and kind of thought-provoking approach, because I wanted to know why. There were over 1,000 girls at a time working in Galveston's Red Light District, and it lasted for almost 70 years. So I knew that there had to be a lot more going on than just a bunch of prostitutes on the streets, and so I really wanted to dive into that story. And what emerged was a beautiful feminist kind of interpretation of what was going on back in our country in the first half of the 20th century. So this is one of the very few photographs that we have of a Galveston prostitute. This was found in a house that I'll show you a picture of in a moment. But this madam had actually decided to have photographs of her girls commissioned, and then she hung those portraits on the wall of the parlor. And it was actually a very humanitarian kind of a forward-thinking approach, as opposed to the cattle call kind of meat market that was really the scene at a lot of the madams, where they would just like line up all the girls, you know, and the guys would walk down and choose their favorite.
And give people some context of where Galveston's red light district was located.
I sure will. Show me. All right. So where are we on this map? This is Avenue Q.
This is Seawall, yeah.
14th. So this is 25th Street. This is pretty much the main drag. Like right here is Pleasure Pier. All right, for today's reference. And then over here is the Railroad Museum. This is the harbor, and then obviously the Gulf of Mexico. So the red light district, and actually we're over here. This is the downtown area. So this is Market, this is Church, and then Post Office Street is right in the middle. It's so funny. I can tell when this map was made, okay, because you notice how there's no western arm of Post Office Street on this map. And that is because in the late 70s and early 80s, to the best of my knowledge, they built this substation right here, right in the middle of 26th Street and Post Office. And so it basically cut off the whole western part of Post Office Street from the rest of the town. And so it's so funny. This is Mister McKinney's map here that he pulled up, and I've never seen that. And that is absolutely amazing how they were just basically trying to erase it from history, and I guess they weren't counting on me coming along in 2018, right? This is one of the brothels that actually operated on the interior of downtown. This is on 20th Street, in between the Strand and Harborside. Now, the brothels that operated on the interior of downtown had to be a lot more clever. The whole female boarding house cover that was going on Post Office Street wouldn't really fly downtown. So what madams did, and several business owners, was take these commercial buildings, and then they would open up a legitimate business on the bottom floor here. And then they would, and see this little bitty door here? This door actually conveniently goes straight to a staircase, straight to the upper floor. And so the brothel would be upstairs. Now this building, you'll also notice, you can barely see it. It says 114 in front of that door, and then 116 in front of the little door. So in the city directories, 114 20th Street was listed as the Rainbow Club. It was a gambling club with drinking and some slot machines and things like that. And then 116 was named the Rainbow Room. So if you were perusing the city directories, you'd know which door to go into. This is another one of a later brothel, actually, after the line shut down, which, by the way, the line is simply a nickname for Galveston's district. But these madams, the madams who got kicked off the line, moved, get this, 1 block away over to Market Street. And they operated there for another 10 years after the district had been shut down. But they actually took a cue from those madams who had operated in downtown, and they did the same thing. So you see the little bitty door right here. So you would go straight up to the staircase there. And then in 1958, this building was listed as the Welcome Inn, I-N-N, Welcome Inn, but still got a little ring to it, right? And it listed that the building had a restaurant. So this bottom area here was where the restaurant was, and then the upstairs was where you were welcome in. All right, we flip through. All right, where are we? Okay, this is a house of another madam. This house is actually still standing. I'm about to show it to you. This house has since been demolished, as have most of the houses on actual Post Office Street. But this house was owned by a woman named Lula Wilcox. And the next slide will show you her, oh wait, maybe not. Her business card, or we'll get to it in a second.
Yeah.
Okay, so this lattice was actually a very distinct feature of the brothels on the Post Office Street, because this was not an open door policy. You didn't just walk in. You had to be vetted and screened. And so the madams would install the lattice so that the men could wait to be let inside and not be seen from the street. And that's just one of many examples of the discretion and believe it or not, the class that many of these madams and girls operated with in Galveston's district. I equate it to honor among thieves. If they were going to do it, they were going to do it right. In fact, someone from the Maceo family told me the best line ever. He said, "It might not have been right, but it sure was proper." And so that was our district. This is one of the only known photographs of a madam from Galveston on the bottom left. Her name was Mary Russell. They called her Gouch Eye, because you see her little eye right there. It's kind of funny. Now, Mary became one of the most successful madams in Galveston history, and you can see why right here. She specifically hired college girls to work in her brothels. They would actually come down to Galveston, and they would work and save for college tuition. and then go back from whence they came, and they didn't have to tell anybody what they had been doing. That was a big feature of Galveston's district, was anonymity. Wow. These women could come down here and work, and nobody would be any the wiser.
Like
this one looks 16. Oh yeah, they look like secretaries that just walked off of out of an office building.
Very
but
true.
This is what Mary Russell ran, what were called high-end brothels, and those girls were expected to be well and immaculately groomed at all times, and not belie their profession when they were in public.
Look at that.
As well. So this is the house from where the first photograph came. So this was a house originally owned by a woman named Molly Waters, who arrived to Galveston in the 1880s, and she actually built this house in 1886, and that makes this house a treasure because it's one of the only houses that we know of, at least, that was built to be a brothel, as opposed to all the other houses that were kind of converted, that were already houses that were already
that makes
there.
it unique and special.
It does. So this was Lula's card I was talking about earlier. So 2526 Avenue E, and you can see rooms because she was just a boarding house. It was just a boarding house.
I love that they had business card. Look at this.
Yeah. This is another house that was a 2705 Post Office Street, and it's now demolished a little further west from Lula's and from Mary Russell's that we saw. And so as you can see, this area of town had originally been actually a pretty elite street. And now this wasn't a huge, massive house, but you can tell by the trim and the windows and such. And this house is already 100 years old at this point. So, these were nice little beach cottages built by Texas senators, wealthy ranchers from all across Texas. But the cityscape of Galveston kind of shifted, that had severely diminished the real estate value of this side of Post Office Street that had nothing to do with the district. But that made them ripe for the picking. This is across the street, 2710 Post Office. Now this house right here is still standing. This house is gone, so is this one, but this is actually gives you a really good idea, because at first this looks like one house, but this is actually two different houses, because it shows you that there were actually houses all down the alleyway as well, because that house is behind this one. So it wasn't just Post Office Street, it was all the side streets, it was the two alleyways that ran on the south and north sides of Post Office Street. So during the Great Depression is when it reached its peak and employed over 1,000 girls at a time.
Wow.
Yeah. This was a
pushback.
Yeah, a little pushback. Yeah. Now in Galveston, these pamphlets were pretty much used as kindling, and that was about it. But there was an organization called the ASHA, which stood for the American Social Hygiene Association, and they were relatively successful in closing down districts all over the nation. But it took them almost 15 years to close Galveston's, and they had a lot of help. So had to have a lot of help from that. All right.
Let's jump into your newest book.
Yes, sir.
Why that's exciting is because this is an authorized history, and I think as you just saw and heard the last two books that she talked about, for example, in small segments, because we're going to have Kimber Fountain back on. If you're just tuning into Facebook Live or Instagram Live, we appreciate you doing so and learning about Houston history, local history, Galveston history, our area. We're in the St. John's Church. Here is her newest book, which is about the Macios. It's called The Macios and the Free State of Galveston, an authorized history. And like I said, in order to get certain families, especially notable families, to open up, you have to be knowledgeable, you have to be respected, and you have to be somebody who people really think they can, do it justice, and you sure have with this book. So let's talk about...
Well, let me tell you first how the book came to be, because I think people want to know why you, and why were you authorized to do it. I started studying the Maceo history back in 2008, actually, over a decade ago. And I immediately saw, the first thing that I noticed was that and the red light history had kind of been brushed under the rug, and nobody was talking about it. And the people who were talking about it were constantly referring to the Maceo family as mafia and mobsters and gangsters, and that's not what I saw. Yeah. When I saw this history, I was like, wait a second, these guys weren't hanging people from bridges like the Mexican cartel. There was no St. Valentine's Day massacre like, in Chicago. It was like, there was something about this family that was, sure, it was organized, and sure, there were some elements of their enterprise that were illegitimate by the law standard, but they weren't violent and they weren't coercing people, and that's why it was called the Free State of Galveston. And so in my first two books, I actually cover the Maceo history pretty extensively. And so get this. So I actually had the release party for the Red Light District book at Macio's downtown.
Oh, okay.
All right, because
Which makes sense. It's downtown, not too far from the post office.
Well, and actually, Market Street
area.
is where some of those brothels were, and they're the only ones that still existed. And so it was a perfect area, and it didn't have anything to do with the Macio's having to do with prostitution. It was just because that street. And I love Concetta, Maceo. Hi, Concetta.
And you want to support local too.
Exactly.
Which is
support
important.
local,
Supporting
always.
local businesses.
And so about 2 nights before the release party, I get a text message from Concetta, and she says, Kimber, my dad wants to know if you said anything negative about my family in your Red Light District book. And I said, well, let me just tell you. Now, I'd known Concetta for a long time at this point, but she didn't really know how deep my obsession with her family history was at that point. And so I said, let me just tell you, not only do I not talk bad about your family, it's actually the exact opposite. Galveston, the Macio's carried Galveston through the Great Depression, through World War II, through some of the most trying economic times in our country's history. And they ushered in this era of prosperity and opulence and glamour that has never been duplicated. And so she said that after she read my text message to her dad, that her dad kind of had tears in his eyes, like he got misty, because he had never heard anybody talk about his family the right way. And so then we had the party, went off splendidly, and a couple of days later I showed up to pay the bill, and that's when she had said she had talked to her dad and her uncle, and they wanted me to write the book. And it was just one of those things, if I'd have walked into Macio's 5 years ago and said, hey, I want to write a book about your family, I would have been,
they might be a little bit,
exactly. I would have been laughed out of the place. And so it was just beautiful to develop this, because Concetta is an amazing person, to develop a friendship with her, and then to nurture the history in my first 2 books, and then have it all culminate into being asked to write it was just, that's really a historian's dream come true, Yeah.
That is great. And I just love the idea, like I said, that the family, connected with you in the way
and
they
even
did.
so, and even still, Ronnie, Concetta's dad, just read it, and Concetta told me he was on the phone calling everybody saying, there's stuff in this book that I didn't know anybody knew, because even though, I did, interview family members, I still did some very, very in-depth, a very deep dive into the family, and I was able to, uncover some interesting theories. And
were you ever able to cover them in the magazine, the monthly magazine that you wrote for over the years?
I covered the business. I covered the current business.
Gotcha.
I sure did.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But this is great because now you can dive into family stories.
Yeah.
So kind of take us through the 2 Maceo brothers, or the Maceo family in general.
Sure. Well, at the center of the Maceo Empire were 2 brothers originally from Sicily named Salvatore and Rosario Maceo, affectionately known as Sam and Rose. Right here is a photograph of Rose. This is Rosario, right here. They just called him Rose Maceo. Now, Rose Maceo became one of my favorites when I was researching, because he was so misunderstood. All right, but unlike, everybody in life wants to be understood, right?
Yeah,
and usually a lot of times we get really bent out of shape when people don't understand us. But man, Rosario was just iron, and he didn't care, and he actually used all the rumors that circulated around the family to his benefit. One of the biggest rumors about Rosario was that he was the enforcer, was that he was the big, deadly guy. But actually, I was able to kind of, dive into where that rumor came from. And really, it only stemmed otherwise from no activity of Rosario that was documented. But that rumor stemmed from a thought that he had killed his first wife. That was the rumor that was going on, that Rose had murdered his first wife. Well, I did the digging, and in 1921, sure enough, one of the Rosario's brothers' wives did die, but it was not Rose's wife. It was their brother Vincent's wife. She was actually found with her head bashed in. Her body was found over off of Stewart Road and 61st in that area. There used to be just brush over there before it was developed. And but the murder was never solved. But it was one of those, like the game of telephone, where one person says something and by you get to the end, it's different.
Rumors are always
and so,
out there, yeah.
But the genius part of what Rose did is that he never refuted it. He never, he never made some big statements, trying to clear his name. But he was not a brutal guy. He simply used that reputation to kind of keep some people in line. That's all you needed, was the reputation. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So this is his brother, Sam, right here in the middle. And by the way, if you're a New Orleans history junkie, this is Seymour Weiss over here on his left, the Macios and Seymour, who was a big hotelier in New Orleans. They were thick and friends. I was about to say thick as thieves. They weren't thieves. I didn't want to give the wrong impression. They were thick. So Sam was the dapper one, and he was the one with all of the charm and all of the charisma. And the best part about Sam, and really the entire Maceo family was like this, they were so all-inclusive. They could make the bartender and the janitor feel just as royal as the oil tycoon coming down from Houston to gamble at their clubs. You know, they just
hospitality was king, yeah.
But it was even more heightened than just hospitality. It was like this diplomacy that came from a very genuine place. You know, they were very compassionate people. They grew up penniless, you know, in Sicily, and they immigrated, you know, all the way, you know, through New Orleans on a horrible 2-week-long, you know, boat ride with no plumbing and, you know, all of this. And they specifically left Sicily to escape the conditions that the mafia had exacerbated there, of the extortion and all of that. And so they never forgot where they came from.
But they had great success.
They did have great success.
So let's talk a little about their business savvy and they're not, I guess it's luck, but luck is when opportunity is preparation.
Exactly.
So they were the right people, the right time, the right place, the right city.
And the right vision and the right motive as well too, because they really did have a genuine love for Galveston. And so everything that they did was really fueled not necessarily by profit, but by what can we do to enrich the whole of Galveston. And so you know, they started in business roughly around 1920, and so then by 1921 they had opened up their very first restaurant off the seawall that would later become the world famous Balinese Room. Then in 1926 they opened up the Hollywood Dinner Club, and then that was followed by their official headquarters called the Turf Athletic Club. Now, Turf Athletic Club was not a club, that was just the name of the business, the umbrella business. This is the Hollywood. This was on the corner of 61st and Stewart Road. There's a convenience store where this used to be now, unfortunately, but it was, you can tell it was built in the Spanish Italianate style, a Spanish Renaissance style, with the barrel tiled roof and the floor to ceiling windows. It was the very first place in the United States where you could find high-end gambling, high-class entertainment, and gourmet food all under one roof. Now today, that is a very normal thing. We call it Las Vegas. But it's a very little known fact that the Macios, it was the Macios in Galveston, our little bitty 32-mile long island, that actually pioneered that template that would later be picked up by the...
And you mentioned the Turf Grill, or the Turf Club earlier. I mentioned
Turf Athletic Club was a building down on Market Street, and the Turf Grill was on the bottom floor. So this was another one of their restaurants. This was the inside, a little lounge area.
It's so cool. Look at
that as well.
So
I mean, they were so stylish and so fashionable. It was really, really great.
Now, most people know their legacy from this iconic seawall structure. So talk about what we're looking at now.
Sure. Now, this is the Balinese Room. Now, the original restaurant that they had built on this property was about right here. It was right off the seawall, right? Then they decided to change it and open up a gambling club in the back of the restaurant. And so they built a 200-foot pier, and they put the restaurant and the gambling club. But then that club got raided several times, and then the Hollywood Dinner Club over on 61st got raided, and Sam and Rose were really exasperated, and so they decided that their ultimate goal was to build a raid-proof club. And so they constructed a 600-foot pier that jutted out, because of the angle it doesn't look that long, but I promise it was, over the Gulf of Mexico. And then the restaurant, it was a T. At the end there was a T head, and the restaurant was in the base of the T, and then the gambling rooms were in the top of the T. And so this walkway here, it was covered, and it had this beautiful carpet and little sconces at every several feet, but it was sardonically nicknamed Ranger Run after the Texas Rangers, because they had to run down there to try to bust them gambling. So up front in the foyer there would be the maitre d' or the hostess. And she had an alarm that she would press, and it would send alarm bells off in the back gambling room, and they would enact this presto changeo thing, and it was really quite miraculous. They had trap doors underneath the bar where they could ditch the liquor bottles. By the way, prohibition had been lifted at that point, but liquor by the drink was still illegal in Texas until like the 1970s. Of course, liquor by the drink was readily available in Galveston. And so this is the original front. Go ahead.
I was going to say, because this is on the cover of your new book,
It is.
Again, the Maceos and the Free State of Galveston by Kimber Fountain. If you're just joining us now, we're with Kimber Fountain, three-time Galveston author about the history of Galveston, and of course historian. We'll talk more about her in a little bit as well, what all she does, because she does a lot in Galveston that you need to know about that. But this original, Art Moderne-like structure facade in the front is different than what we all think of, the iconic Balinese room that most of us think of, which came much later, but this is an original photo.
This is an original photo from probably around 1940. No, I'm sorry, it was opened in 42, probably around 45, around there. And and you can tell the Art Deco. Now this is an artist rendering of the interior. This is the Ranger Run right here. So you see the patterned, they had these palm frond carpet and these beautiful sconces and chandeliers. Over here was the dance floor. And on each four corners of the dance floor, these were copper palm trees that were interwoven with neon lights.
Wow.
And then they had this fish netting with black lights and globes, and it was just such a scene. Sometimes I close my eyes and try to imagine myself still inside there. This is one of the lounges. They had little lounges off the side of the dining room, and then this is another one of those lounges with an aquarium. And that was actually a massive aquarium for the time. It doesn't look too big by today's standards, but back then that was a pretty big deal.
And like I said, this is what we think of when we think of the Balinese room.
When we think of the Balinese room, is this Asian facade. But it's a very little known fact that facade was actually not put into place until 1965, when Johnny Mitchell purchased the Balinese room from auction and just decided to, I guess, make it match its name a little bit more. That what's it called, mimetic architecture.
Marketing too.
Yeah, and marketing, exactly.
Saw that on the seawall.
But it's funny because you think about generationally, that happened in '65. So almost most people who are alive now, that's all they know. Exactly.
Yeah,
there's a lot more people that have been alive since this was the facade than there were since that had been the facade, and so it's a common mistake that's made. But this is.
And what happened to the Balinese room for those of not from Houston? Tell us all the
2008, Hurricane Ike, September 13th of 2008. Now here you can see that the top of that facade, but these are the huge waves crashing over right before Ike really made landfall. This is just the beginning of it. But the thing is, Mister McKinney, is that I was, when I was researching the book, I came across some photographs of the revamped Balinese room. Okay, so after it was, so Johnny Mitchell let it go, and then it was picked up in, I think, 2002, somewhere around there, by a business owner named Scott Arnold, who is great.
Oh, yeah.
He's a very well-known entrepreneur in our town, and he's launched some amazing concepts and really done a lot for our local economy, including, he still has the lease on the current Balinese room. But one thing that I noticed when I was looking at these pictures were, the interior of the Balinese during the 2000s, they had metal chairs and plastic tablecloths, and the guy on the stage was wearing ripped blue jeans,
wow.
And I was like, and so to me it was almost symbolic.
Better.
Yeah,
maybe it's better that it's gone. Exactly.
That's not to say I don't wish that on anybody.
You know the history, and
exactly.
And I think like so many of us who in the history community that lecture or write books or do presentations, we feel like we know these people.
Yeah, and the places.
Intimately, and the places
too,
well enough because we're really kind of engulfed in all the background information about it. So
sure.
I think when you see something you love and care about, kind of just go to that level, you're really just kind of wishing that you remember what it used to be. So I can relate to that.
As exciting as it was to have that homage and that tribute to the Balinese, were we really doing it justice? No offense, no offense to anyone involved in it, but and I understand there might currently, until if and when we ever legalize gambling, there might not be a market for that high ends, but I think people will rise to the level of your expectations as well. When it comes to business and anything, and so who's to say it wouldn't be a premier night spot. So
it could be. You never know.
This is actually a family heirloom. Now the Sui Ren, as it's pronounced, was actually that very first the 200-foot pier restaurant I told you prior to the Balinese room. Not the first one. This is a family heirloom. So this is an invitation to opening night, as you can see, November 2nd, 1932. And then Sam Maceo's signature up there. And and you see Hollywood Dinner Club management up here. Takes pride and pleasure in announcing the opening within a few weeks of a new and distinctive dine and dance club on the site formerly occupied by the Grotto. Yeah, and then prior to that, it was even.
And this is an
another
example of things that you got access to that's in your book.
exactly,
It's
that you'll
rare.
never see anywhere else.
Yeah, and that's why it's worth learning more about that, and we're going to let people know. There's by the way, there is a link in the bio for the video on the Heritage Society page that takes you to Kimber's site and where you can purchase the book, especially
Directly
now.
from you.
Directly, and I think that's
signed.
important. You get it signed, but more importantly, you support local authors and artists, because I think as someone who tells stories, you're a performer, but you're supporting local by doing it directly through Kimber Fountain. So consider that. And then now you've got something to read and learn more about it as we talk about it. So this is a fun little cartoon.
I love this, and this helps me illustrate. I mentioned earlier, the level of opulence that the Macios had ushered in. So this was a comic that was in a magazine that was actually published by Sam Maceo.
Oh, cool!
It's so funny to go back and find out that he was a publisher of a magazine, and I was, writing for a magazine.
It's like Glenn McCarthy. He had newspapers, he had radio stations. So these people that we think of as doing this, if you dig more and dive more, you realize they had so many, like an onion, so many layers.
Oh yeah. The Maceo empires, by the end of it, first of all, it was almost entirely legitimate by the end of it. But so this is a comic of the interior of, I like to call it the Galvez. I don't know if it's the Galvez or not. It's a really fancy hotel, right? And you have Mr. and Mrs. Cowboy in their little boots and their cute little hats, right? But the best part is you go down to the caption and you hear them asking the maitre d', "Are you sure this is Texas?" And so that just gives you a great idea of really what the Macios achieved here in Galveston. Like any kind of image that you can conjure in your imagination about 1930s Hollywood glamour, that is what was happening in Galveston, at the time. It was amazing.
It's awesome. And it's obviously exceeding their expectations, because as they're coming to visit, and what do they do in Texas? They wear their
they wear their
rodeo
chaps
get
and
up
their
and their
hats,
chaps and their hats, and I love that, because I've bumped into people that think that we all ride horses to work in Texas, and it's like, no.
Well, sometimes we perpetuate it. My mom tells me a story of some friends of hers that they never wore cowboy hats and boots unless they went out of state.
Oh yeah.
And then just to proclaim their presence.
Yeah, 100%. You got to keep it going. And then now famous people also frequented the Balinese Room and all of the Macios projects and properties. Talk about Jack Benny and some of the people that did that. We have this famous guy.
This is great. This is Sam Maceo in the middle here, but you notice this really look on Jack Benny's face here. So and you see the smile on Sam's face.
This is a great story,
guys. This is one of my favorite stories. So Sam Maceo had decided to prank Jack Benny, and he told the waiter that was waiting on them to bring Jack Benny the check, even though he was their guest. And so obviously Jack Benny was used to being the funny guy himself and wasn't really too pleased about Sam Maceo getting one over on him. So that is right after that happened. And,
I love that.
Yeah.
And then of course the Italian connection. Who can ever forget? Look at this.
Old blue eyes right here, Mr. Frank Sinatra. Now, this is Rosario, by the way, Rose. And there's Sam. I'm sorry, that is not. This is Fertitta. This is Anthony Fertitta. I'm sorry. A lot of them look alike. This is Rose. Sam over here. So here's the thing about Frank Sinatra, and one thing that is...
Clear this up, because people say this,
Yeah.
I mean, not on your tours, but other people probably are out there saying it.
They do. They are out there saying it in lots of places.
Like, no, don't say it.
In fact, I think my book is almost one of the first places it's ever said
Definitive,
correctly. Yeah, but Frank Sinatra actually never sang a note in Galveston, but now the Macios in the late 40s had decided to venture into Las Vegas, because they really wanted to be in a place where their business was no longer illegal, right? They really wanted that. And so they were actually they were partner investors. There were many other investors, but both Sinatra and the Macios were part investors of the Sands Casino originally. In the late 40s. And so that's how they became friends. Well, Frank Sinatra, as we all know, was quite the womanizer, right? And so occasionally he would foray with one of his mafia boss buddies' wives, or one of their daughters, or something that would make them mad. And so he would have to go hide out for a little while until things cooled off. And he would come to Galveston, and he would hang out at Grandma Macio's house, actually, and they would hide him. Now, for Sam's benefit, he would make some appearances. This is him dining at the Balinese Room, simply to bring some, some notoriety and some glamour and some
because
press.
all the papers would cover it. If he all of a sudden shows up at the Balinese Room, everybody's talking about it, the next day. and it just kind of, is he going to come back the next week? Who knows?
So then it was just actually kind of assumed that
Yeah.
he performed in Galveston, which he actually never did.
I love that.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the next generation. You said her name earlier. Who's the next generation of Macios in Galveston we should know about?
Right. So the third, I'm going to go back up because I really want people to know how the current Macios who are running it are connected to Salmon Rose. And because I was actually the first historian that was ever able to accurately and completely dissect the Maceo family tree. Even some living family members didn't even know what I figured out about their family lineage. So it was really fun. But anyway, so Salmon Rose, I won't give you the whole detail. But Salmon Rose, it's not really a tree, it's a family bush, right? And so Salmon Rose had this whole set of cousins on the opposite side. Back in 19th century Sicily, two Maceo brothers married two sisters. So they created these two branches of the Maceo family. So that's why whenever you read about the Maceos anywhere, it's always talking about cousins. Cousin this, cousin, everybody's a cousin. But that's why, because all of their children were double cousins because their mothers and their fathers were related. So on the opposite side of the bush from Salmon Rose was their cousin Frank, and he was the third largest investor in the Maceo Empire, second only to Salmon Rose. Well, Frank had several children, one of whom was also named Rosario, but his nickname was Slick Maceo, whose birthday was actually yesterday, or the celebration of his birthday was yesterday. And so Slick had the Maceo magic, right? And so he decided to open up Maceo Seafood Company in 1944, and then shortly after that invested again and expanded again and opened up Maceo Spice and Import Company. And so it is currently owned and operated by Slick's son, who's Ronald Maceo, and Ronald's daughter, Slick's granddaughter, Concetta Maceo. So Concetta and her dad Ronnie are the descendants of the third largest investor in the Maceo Empire.
I think she has a show, right? The Cooking with Concetta.
Cooking with Concetta, yeah, she's so talented.
And talk about these items. We have these are going to be door prizes. Because in honor of Kimber Fountain and of course in honor of Concetta Maceo, so I had the pleasure of going to the Maceo Spice and Import Company. She donated these two items here for us to give away. So we now have 5 questions and 5 prizes that we're going to be doing at the end of this video, which is going to happen very shortly in a couple of minutes. So stay tuned for these prizes and these questions because you have to chime in to let us know the answer to them. But there she is, Concetta Maceo, so kind. They've been around since 1944, the Maceo Spice and Import Company. And I want to thank you again, Kimber Fountain, for sharing your knowledge. It was absolutely a pleasure to be able to learn about Galveston history and the way that we learned it with you. You're hyper, high energy. I love the idea of the way that you spread Houston and Galveston history specifically. And we're going to have you back to talk about these topics, I think, when we do our live audience, which will hopefully be in a couple of months as things kind of get better.
Definitely.
Because we are looking forward to doing things. And we've got a really awesome board member at the Heritage Society, Kirksey Gregg Productions, who did this amazing thing for us that you're going to learn more about as you stay tuned to the Facebook page and the Instagram and the Twitter of the Heritage Society. So stay tuned to that. But let's ask the audience some questions real quick. We've got 5 items here. First off, you have we'll talk about as we go through them. So let's start with the Galveston Seawall Chronicles book. This book is autographed by Kimber Fountain. Her first book. It is signed. It's the first prize we're going to give away. There it is. You're going to get that book if you can answer a question right about the Galveston Seawall Chronicles, the first section we talked about. So give them one question that they are that they're going to have.
Should it be something I talked about, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay,
something,
all right.
Something
how long did the construction of the seawall take? I mentioned that, right? Or if you can even get the years. The year it started.
How about the start of it?
The start of it.
Okay, so we're looking for a date. We're looking for the start of the Galveston Seawall. When did construction start? Because as Kimber Fountain mentioned earlier, it had phases, so it would kind of be completed in phases, and that's hard to kind of grasp. But the idea of it starting is a big milestone for Texas, has saved our butts in our region numerous times, and I'm sure people in Tiki Island and Texas City appreciate it too. That Galveston Seawall. So that's the question. When did the Galveston Seawall start construction? Okay. Next question is going to be about the Red Light District, Galveston Red Light District, the history of the line by, once again, Kimber Fountain, an autographed copy. There it is. We need you to ask us questions.
What was one of the reasons that I mentioned that girls would actually come to Galveston to work on the line? Remember, I showed you a picture with the madam and the girls that were with her, and I specifically mentioned that they were in Galveston saving money for actually a very noble cause. And if you can remember what that was, you're the winner.
You're the winner of the book. There you go. Okay, now let's do your last book, or your current book rather, not your last book, because I don't think you're done. I think she'll be doing multiple books about Galveston and our regional history, because no one can do it like Kimber Fountain does. Let's talk about the Macios and the Free State of Galveston, your current book, which is available. They're all available on your website. But let's ask a question about this. One question, which is hard, about the Macios that someone can answer to win this item. Actually, we're going to have 3 questions about the Macios, because we have this Concetta barbecue rug. Okay? Set a Q barbecue rug.
Our favorite.
Autographed.
We use this almost on everything.
Autographed by her.
Now, and all of their spices, they have no preservatives, no MSG, no anti-caking agents, none of that. It's all fresh, and they're all blended in-house.
Yeah, no, exactly. So there you go. The next thing is, so you have 3 questions.
Okay, so 3 questions. So let's do an easy one
for
the first spice. All right, the easy question is what year was Maceo Spice and Import founded? Woo, I'm knocking things over here. I don't want you to cheat because it's on the thing, but that's question number 1.
Okay, so we'll turn the bottom. Perfect. So what year was the Maceo Spice and Import Company founded? That is the very first question. It's an easy question. You probably can Google it, but if you paid attention to our little segment earlier, you would have told us. So keep going.
All right, we've got another easy one for round 2. I'm going to cover up the date again just so we don't give it away. What was the nickname of Concetta's grandfather who started Maceo Spice and Import Company? It's the most Italian nickname ever in the whole world. Just give you a hint. Okay. All right.
Okay, there you go.
All right, so for the big whammy.
The big one, here it is.
What was the name of the very first luxury gambling house opened by the Macios? It was on the corner of 61st and Stewart Roads.
Okay.
And it was I remember I said it was the very first place in the nation where you could get hot gourmet food, high-end entertainment, and high-end gambling all in
Hooray for that answer. Okay, there you go. I won't give it away, but it is going to be, again, if you watched our video, and you can always go back and watch it, but there you go. This is a wonderful, but now, if they didn't win these items here, and they didn't get a book, where can people get a hold of you? Where can they follow you? Where can they like you?
Sure.
And tell people also what you do beyond the wonderful writing that you do, because it's kind of also what you're known for as well. I think she's so innovative in what she does. So you tell about it, and I'll drop in some tidbits, but go for it.
Sure. Well, I am the editor-in-chief of Galveston Monthly Magazine on the island. I've been with them since 2015, and actually it was my publisher, John Hall, who planted the seed for the first book. I was in his office and he said, hey, what do you think about a year-long series on the seawall? And that's literally all he told me. But I just was like, for some reason, it just sounded like the best idea ever in the whole world. And so I ran with it, and then that's ultimately how the Galveston Seawall Chronicles came to be. But I also recently, or about a year ago, back in March of 2019, launched the Red Light District Tours of Galveston, based on actually both of these books, based on the Red Light and the Maceo book. Because even though the Macios weren't entrenched in prostitution, you really can't tell the story of the Red Light District without telling the story of the Free State of Galveston.
Yeah.
So it's a really great kind of all-inclusive, but as far as the places we see, most of those focus on the Red Light District. Now, unfortunately, I do have to throw this in, just because I want everybody to be clear and I don't want you to be taken for a ride. There is a copycat tour out there.
Oh, no.
So I just want everyone to make sure that if you come to my tour, that if you go to the website, which is just Red Light District Tours of Galveston, or rldtg.com, just make sure it says my name on the website. Or even you can message me, email me, or find me on Facebook. You are super
responsive. You can get a hold of Kimber Fountain. She puts herself all out there because she wants to connect you to Houston and Galveston history. I keep saying Houston, but obviously it's Galveston.
So if you're worried you're going to book the wrong tickets, just send me an email, send me a message, and we'll make sure I'll send you the direct link.
So if you don't hear her voice on the end of that line,
exactly.
Getting you connected to one of the tours.
And I give all the tours personally as well too. Yes. And now I do.
You do something innovative. So I've got the pleasure of being the president for the Friends of the Texas room. I see Nancy Birch also tuned in earlier. Hey, Nancy Birch, what's going on? She's a buddy, and I think she might have answered the question right. We got to look and see, but you got close, and I think you got it right. But we have 4.5 million historical images in our collection over at the Downtown Public Library, right there, Jules Addison Building. And when it comes to that, I blow them up as foam boards and we show them to people as we're doing our tours.
Yeah.
But you're like 10 years ahead of me, right? What do you do on your tours that makes them unique and innovative that nobody can copy? Talk about that.
Thank you. Well, originally I had the historic photos as well, but I had them on my iPad. I was displaying them on my iPad, and I had this cool little thing with the handle, But the thing is that my arm is not 6 feet long, right? And since we've gotten, a lot more cognizant and aware of what's going on in our world today with the COVID, the Rona, as I like to call it, I have developed a system to where I actually send those historic images to the people on the tour directly, so you can view the images from your own device. That way you don't have to have my germs in your face to be able to look at the pictures. And it's really neat. People love it because these are historic photos, so they have a lot of detail, and so people can zoom in. And not only that, you can take them with you. They're on your device, so even after the tour, you can go back and look at them again if you're interested in them. And so it was really kind of cool. I was proud of myself for coming up with that.
Of course, master importance, listeners are important as well.
Sure.
If you're still doing tours throughout the COVID process, you're doing them in limited groups, and they can get a hold of you. How can people get a hold of you directly?
Sure. The best way to get a hold of me directly is either the Red Light District Tours of Galveston on Facebook, which is actually called the original Red Light District Tours of Galveston on Facebook. Actually, really the easiest way is just kimberfountain.com. If you go to kimberfountain.com, you'll find links to the tours, you'll find links to my books, you'll find links to everything there. And I'm actually going to be starting some new stuff coming up. I have this thing, I want to help local writers as well. And so I really want to start doing some virtual writing workshops and really helping people who are interested in researching and writing their own works, and reach out that way as well. So that's really the easiest way. All my contact information is on there, but you can also directly contact me through Facebook.
And you can follow her on social media, of course. At author Kimber Fountain is what you look up under Facebook, and then you'll get her right away. She posts a lot of lectures that she gives around the area, so don't be afraid to follow her and learn more about local history.
And please, if you can, buy my books directly. They are from a nationwide publisher called Arcadia Publishing, so they are beautiful and pristine and professionally done.
And you can get them everywhere. You can get them at Amazon.
You can get them everywhere.
Why not do it directly?
Why not get them signed and also support a local author directly?
Personalized, support local, get it to you a lot quicker because she'll give it to you right away, and then you can take her one of her tours. So thank you so much to Kimber Fountain for joining us here at the Heritage Society, Live Heritage Society at St. John Church. Lastly, I do want to invite you to like and follow Mr. McKinney's Historic Houston and the Houston History Bus. And the reason why is we do free tours. Like the Heritage Society, we partner with them to do free tours to educate people about Houston's past on board the Houston History Bus. So speaking of tours, there you go. And we'll be launching our free tours coming up as obviously things get better, but you've got to like and follow our social media pages in order to do so. I only mention it because it is a free public service, and you can learn more about local history. I want to thank Randy Pace for joining us, and Nancy Birch and Will Howard, who's going to be joining us on August 8th. All these awesome folks. Michael Bloworth also joined us in on Facebook too. We are going to go through and find out who the winners are for those, because some people all had the same answer, but whoever had it first is the one who wins. And the great thing about Facebook Live is it tells you exactly what time you chimed in. And then you can go to HoustonHistoryBus.org to learn more about the Houston History Bus as well. And of course, let's please be sure to follow and like the Heritage Society. We said that earlier in the start of it. Please make sure that you do that. The Heritage Society is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Easy to find. And if you do that, of course, you'll learn more about local history. Kudos to Alana, Isaac, Kian, Kai, and of course, our whole team that puts it together, especially Allison Aries Bells, is Executive Director for the Heritage Society, and Manette Basel, who is our board chair. And a last reminder, we have no show next Wednesday, July 29th at 7 p.m. No show next week, but the first one that we're going to do rather is going to be on Wednesday, July 29th at 7 p.m. It's going to take you through the historic 1905 Steadeye House. We're very excited about this. The house itself from Westmoreland, built in 1905 with a 1915 Alfred C. Finn addition onto it as well. We're going to have a really cool look inside. Lastly, good night. Thank you again for joining us. We went a little bit over, but hey, we've got people still watching, so we appreciate those folks that stayed to the very end. Kimber Fountain, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. McKinney.
Yeah, and take care, Houston.
Bye, Houston. See you in Galveston.